Dark Phantoms were the most feared motorcycle gang across 3 states. They didn't just intimidate, they dominated. They shattered livelihoods, silenced resistance, and built their empire on fear. But one quiet summer morning in Silver Oak Springs, they made a mistake that would unravel everything they stood for. They didn't just trash a lemonade stand, they crushed the spirit of a little girl who'd been raising money for sick children, one cup at a time. A girl who kept a worn photo of her father, a Navy SEAL, right beside her donation jar. To the Phantoms, it was just another easy target. Another reminder to the town of who was in charge. But they were dead wrong. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Melanie Brighton's father was already on his way home from deployment. And in just a few hours, Commander Sawyer Brighton would return not just as a father, but as a reckoning. Because there's a difference between men who use fear to look powerful and men who walk through real danger to protect others. That small act of cruelty? It was about to ignite a chain reaction that would shake the entire town. Some would call it redemption. Others would call it justice. Quick pause, drop a comment, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're hooked already, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story might just leave you speechless. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the quiet lawns of Silver Oak Springs. Melanie Brighton, Maddie to her friends, lined up freshly cleaned mason jars on the edge of her lemonade stand. Her dad had always said, details matter. And she never forgot. The stand itself was bright and cheerful, painted yellow and white, sitting proudly on the edge of Evergreen Park. She adjusted the framed photo of her dad, making sure it was perfectly angled beside the handwritten sign. Maddie's Lemonade, all proceeds help kids at St. Mary's Hospital. And just below that, in smaller letters, in memory of Grace Brighton. Ruth Whitaker, her silver hair catching the light, approached with her usual calm stride. Good morning, sweetheart. First customer of the day, right on time, Maddie beamed. Extra ice, just the way you like it, she said, already reaching for the jar. Your mother would be proud, Ruth said softly, watching Maddie pour with practiced care. 3 months now, right? 3 months and 12 days, Maddie replied. We've almost raised enough for the hospital's new game system. Dr. Chase says it helps the kids feel less scared during treatments. Ruth smiled and dropped a $20 bill into the jar. Keep the change, dear. But don't stay out too long today, there's talk the Dark Phantoms are nearby. Maddie didn't flinch, but her hands tightened ever so slightly on the jar. Dad says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means doing the right thing even when you are. A low rumble echoed from down the street. Ruth glanced back, uneasy. Your father's a wise man, Maddie. But he's not here right now. He'll be home soon, Maddie said, adjusting the photo again. 3 more months. Ruth paused, then smiled with a sigh. Sometimes I forget you're only 12. The sound of the motorcycles grew louder, then faded. Ruth gave a quick goodbye and hurried off. Maddie was left with her thoughts. She remembered building the stand with her dad before he deployed. The world can be scary, kiddo, he'd said, helping her measure the wood. But love? Kindness? Choosing to help someone when it's hard? That's real strength. A shadow fell across the stand. Maddie looked up. 2 men in dark leather stood there. Patches on their backs read Dark Phantoms. The taller one, a toothpick in his mouth, grinned. Well, ain't this adorable, he sneered. Playing business, are we? Maddie didn't blink. Would you like some lemonade, sir? It's for a good cause. The shorter one laughed, cold and sharp. Sir, huh? Polite little thing. Too bad manners don't pay protection fees. The tall one, Spike, leaned closer, his toothpick jabbing toward the jar. Nice collection you got here. Be a shame if something happened to this pretty little setup. This money's for sick kids, Maddie replied, voice steady though her heart thumped. My mom, she was in that hospital before she passed. I made her a promise to help other families. Spike scoffed. How sweet. But around here, promises don't mean squat. The phantoms run this town. Remember that. They turned and walked away, the bitter scent of cigarettes and leather trailing behind them. Maddie watched them go. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes, the toughest battles aren't fought with fists, but with the courage to stand for what's right. Down the street, Dutch Calloway. From the doorway of his hardware store, Dutch Calloway stood silently, eyes narrowed as the bikers disappeared down the road. He pulled out his phone with a sigh and dialed with purpose. Officer Cross? Yeah, it's Dutch. We might have a situation brewing. The dark phantoms, they're sniffing around Sawyer Brighton's daughter. As the morning dragged on, an invisible tension settled over Silver Oak Springs like a storm cloud. Neighbors came and went, their smiles too forced, their goodbyes too quick. But Maddie didn't budge. She stayed at her stand, pouring lemonade and collecting donations, refusing to let fear take root. By midday, more phantoms rode past. Each pass was slower than the last. They weren't just cruising, they were watching. Testing. Waiting. But what they didn't understand was this: they weren't just facing a 12-year-old girl with a lemonade stand. They were facing the spirit of a Navy SEAL's daughter, a girl raised to believe that true strength means holding your ground when everything around you says to run. And far from Silver Oak Springs, thousands of miles away, Commander Sawyer Brighton was boarding a military transport. His return had been moved up. He was coming home early. The dark phantoms were about to learn the difference between false power and real protection. But for now, Maddie quietly reached out and straightened her father's photo one more time. She poured another glass of lemonade and stood tall, just like he taught her. The afternoon heat shimmered off the pavement when 3 motorcycles rounded the corner onto Oak Street. Their engines thundered low like a coming storm. Leading the pack was Hawthorne, Phantom's leader, riding a massive black Harley, the kind that turned heads and stirred dread. He pulled to a stop across from Maddie's stand. The sudden silence after the engine died felt heavier than the noise. Behind mirrored sunglasses, Hawk took in every detail: the crisp paint, the jars, the handwritten signs, and the photograph of Commander Brighton. His vest creaked as he dismounted, adorned with patches that weren't just for show. "So this is what's got Spike riled up," he muttered, his voice rough like gravel. Axel Blade Reeves, the man behind him, spat on the sidewalk. "Ain't just any kid, boss. That's Brighton's girl. Navy SEAL." Hawk's lips curled, not quite into a smile. "Well, now that is interesting." Maddie stood still, watching them approach. Her mother's final words whispered through her thoughts. She remembered that sterile hospital room 2 years ago, the smell of antiseptic, the silence between beeping machines. "Promise me something, sweetheart," Grace Brighton had whispered, her once strong voice barely audible. "Promise me you'll keep that light burning inside you. The world needs more brightness." Maddie had held her mother's fragile hand. "I promise, Mom. And promise me you'll look after your father. He pretends to be tough, but his heart, it's like yours. So big it hurts." Now, with Hawk just feet away, Maddie lifted her chin. "What can I get for you, sir?" she asked, voice steady. Hawk removed his glasses. His eyes were cold and unreadable. "Cute setup you got here. Raising a lot of money for those sick kids?" "We're doing okay," Maddie replied, hand still and calm. "Would you like some lemonade?" "What I'd like," Hawk leaned in, "is for you to understand how things work around here. Nothing moves in Silver Oak Springs without the phantoms getting their share. Nothing." From across the street, Dutch Calloway was already on his phone again. "Liam, it's me. He's here. Hawk himself. Yeah, I know you're short-staffed, but we need eyes on this now." Moments later, Officer Liam Cross's patrol car turned the corner, lights flashing, sirens off. He stepped out casually, one hand resting near his holster. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he said. "Enjoying some lemonade?" Hawk turned slowly. Just having a friendly chat with this young entrepreneur. Right, miss? Officer Cross scanned the scene. Maddie? Everything all right? Yes, officer, Maddie nodded. I was just explaining our donation program. All proceeds help the kids at St. Mary's Hospital. Hawk's jaw tightened. Something dark flickered in his expression at the mention of the hospital. How noble, he sneered. But nobility doesn't keep the lights on, does it? Doesn't pay for protection. This is a charity stand, Officer Cross said firmly. Even you wouldn't stoop that low. Hawk's eyes narrowed. These days, everything needs protection. Everyone. He turned back to Maddie. Your daddy being gone and all. Would be a shame if something happened while he was away. Before another word could be said, Ruth Whitaker stepped onto her porch, phone in hand. I just got off the phone with Channel 5 News, she called out. They're very interested in doing a story about Maddie's fundraising efforts. Should make for great publicity. Hawk's expression shifted. Media attention was poison to the phantoms. They thrived in the shadows, not under camera lights. We'll continue this little talk another time, Hawk muttered, climbing onto his bike. Think about what I said, little girl. About protection. About how fast things can change. The engines roared back to life. And just like that, the bikers vanished around the corner. But something had changed. And it wasn't Maddie. The air was still thick with tension as Ruth rushed to Maddie's side, her voice a bit softer now. I didn't really call the news, she confessed in a hushed tone. But I figured bluffing was better than doing nothing. Quick thinking, Mrs. Whitaker, Officer Cross said with a nod of respect. Maddie, maybe it's time to pack it up for the day. Maddie's voice was quiet, but solid as stone. No. My mom always said darkness wins when good people walk away. Later that afternoon, a familiar face walked up to the stand, Dr. Morgan Chase, still wearing her hospital coat, ID badge swinging slightly in the breeze. Maddie, honey, we heard what happened with the phantoms. Nobody would blame you if you decided to stop. But Maddie didn't answer that directly. How's Tommy doing? She asked instead. Has he tried the new games yet? Dr. Chase's expression softened, her voice warming. He has. Says they help him forget the chemo, even if just for a little while. She smiled. You're doing something good, Maddie. Something that matters. Then I'm not stopping, Maddie said, already wiping down the counter. Dad always says courage is contagious. Maybe if people see me standing up to them. Meanwhile, across town at the Phantom's clubhouse, Hawk stood in front of a wall of photographs. His gloved fingers lingered on one in particular, a young woman in a hospital bed, pale but smiling. The date read 2 years ago. The same time the hospital had cut funding for military families, denying coverage to high-risk patients. Military families, he spat the words like poison. Always thinking they're better than the rest of us. Like their service gives them some kind of privilege. Behind him, Blade stepped forward cautiously. What about the Brighton girl? Hawk didn't turn. Send a message tonight. Nothing too rough, just enough to remind them no one is untouchable in this town. That evening, as shadows crept across Silver Oak Springs, Maddie packed up for the night. Her donation jar was heavier than usual. Something had shifted. People had quietly shown their support, dropping cash in the jar, a quiet rebellion against fear. But just as she latched the final lid, the first rock hit. It struck the sign dead center, splintering the hand-painted wood. More rocks followed, shattering jars and spraying glass across the sidewalk. Cruel laughter rang out from the darkness. A voice called out from the shadows. This was your warning. There won't be a second. Maddie stood among the wreckage, splintered wood, broken glass sparkling under the streetlight like fallen stars. But she didn't cry. She pulled out her phone, snapped photos of the damage, and documented everything. Her father had taught her. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon isn't a gun. It's the truth, shown at the right time. In the growing darkness, Maddie Brighton began to plan. The phantoms thought they were teaching her fear. But what they were about to learn was strength. Not the kind that breaks things, but the kind that refuses to break. If you're moved by this story, please consider subscribing. It helps us keep telling stories like this one. Now, back to Silver Oak Springs. Morning came, painting the town in soft gold. Maddie swept up the broken glass, each shard catching the light like the stars she used to count with her dad during survival training in their backyard. Her stand, though battered and scarred, still stood. Bent, but not broken. Nearby, Officer Cross crouched down beside one of the larger rocks, inspecting it. They weren't trying to destroy it, he said. This was a message. I got it loud and clear, Maddie replied, carefully collecting fragments of her mother's favorite mason jars. They want me to be afraid. But Mom always said, fear only wins if you let it. Half a world away, aboard a military transport, Commander Sawyer Brighton stared at a photo on his satellite phone. It was the image of Maddie's wrecked stand, sent by Dutch Calloway with just 4 words. She needs you, Sawyer. Earlier than expected, sir, a young lieutenant said, approaching from the aisle. We're wheels up in 20. Sawyer nodded once. His face betrayed nothing, but inside, gears were turning. 15 years of special operations had taught him many things: how to wait, how to strike, how to read the battlefield. And now, the Dark Phantoms were about to learn those same lessons. Back at St. Mary's Hospital, Maddie made her weekly visit. This time, she had no lemonade, just her presence. Where's our special delivery? Asked Tommy from his hospital bed, for lines draped around him like sad confetti. Maddie pulled up a chair, her voice soft but clear. Had a bit of a setback. Tommy's eyes dropped. Is it true? About the phantoms? From the doorway, Dr. Chase's voice was sharp. Tommy. But Maddie raised her hand. It's okay. Yes, it's true. She looked him right in the eyes. But you know what else is true? I'm still here. Still fighting. Just like you. Meanwhile, back at the Phantom's clubhouse, unease was spreading. Cole Hammer Nash paced back and forth, his boots echoing off the worn floorboards. A kid's lemonade stand, boss? 4 sick kids? He stopped and faced Hawk. Some of the guys, they're starting to think this went too far. Hawk slammed his fist down on the bar. Bottles rattled. Silence fell. Too far, he growled. Was it too far when that hospital turned its back on us? On my sister? His voice was a mix of rage and bitterness. This isn't just about turf anymore. They denied my sister's treatment, Hawk muttered, voice low and cracking. Said her insurance wasn't good enough. But somehow, military families got bumped to the front of the line. That was different, Blade offered cautiously. Sarah was. Sarah's dead, Hawk snapped. His voice broke on the final word as he stared at the photo, his sister smiling weakly from a hospital bed, dated 2 years ago. They were building their shiny new children's wing, he continued bitterly, while she died in the old one. Because we weren't a priority. Back in Silver Oak Springs, Ruth Whitaker moved through the town like a quiet revolution. She knocked on doors. She made calls. She reminded neighbors of every bake sale, every fundraiser Grace Brighton had volunteered for. She gave everything to this town, she told Mrs. Peterson at the diner. Now her daughter needs us. Are we really going to let some punks on bikes decide who we are? Some people turned her away, fear written all over their faces. But others listened. Others remembered. Dutch Calloway's hardware store became an unofficial resistance HQ. Contractors quietly dropped off materials to help rebuild the stand. Local teens offered to keep watch in rotating shifts. Small acts of rebellion began to bloom like wildflowers through the cracks of the Phantom's control. But Officer Cross wasn't celebrating just yet. They'll escalate, he said grimly over coffee with Dutch. Hawk's not just protecting turf anymore, he's got something to prove. When, Dutch corrected. when the community rallies around Maddie. Not if. At the hospital, Dr. Morgan Chase reviewed the old file marked Sarah Thorne. As she flipped through the pages, realization dawned. It wasn't about military families getting special treatment, she explained to her staff. Her insurance denied the experimental coverage, not us. But Hawk, he needed someone to blame. And now, he's projecting all of that pain onto a child. A nurse glanced up. All this, just for revenge? Dr. Chase sighed. Sometimes, the deepest wounds make us forget who we are. She remembered the boy who used to visit Sarah every day. Reading to her. Making her laugh. Never leaving her side, even as she slipped away. That afternoon, Maddie rebuilt her stand. Every nail she drove in was a quiet act of defiance. The new sign was simpler, bolder. Every glass of lemonade helps a child fight another day. Tommy's mother stopped by, placing a folded 20 into the donation jar. He asked me to bring this, she said softly. Sid, if you can keep fighting, so can he. A motorcycle rumbled into earshot, and everyone froze. But it was just a delivery rider, grabbing a quick drink between runs. Still, Maddie noticed how his hands trembled as he passed her the cash. How his eyes scanned the street nervously. They can't hurt everyone, Maddie whispered. Not if we stand together. The rider nodded. Brave words, kid. But Hawk? He's got nothing left to lose. That makes him dangerous. As dusk fell, Hawk stood once again in front of the photo wall. Sarah's smile stared back at him, gentle, frozen in time. He touched the frame. You'd hate what I've become, he whispered. But I couldn't save you. I couldn't make them care. Now they'll have to listen. He turned to blade and hammer, face cold and set. Tomorrow, he said, we show this town what happens when they defy us. Not just the lemonade stand this time. We send a message they won't forget. Hammer hesitated. Boss, maybe we should. Maybe you should remember who pulled you out of the gutter, Hawk snapped. Who gave you a patch? A family. Or maybe you'd rather side with them. The threat hung in the air like smoke. But something flickered in Hammer's eyes, a memory of who he was before, when brotherhood meant something good, not fear. As night swept across Silver Oak Springs, two forces gathered strength. At the Phantom's clubhouse, Hawk plotted a display of brute force. And thousands of miles away, in the belly of a military transport plane, Commander Sawyer Brighton studied satellite images of his hometown, planning not for vengeance, but for redemption. Because sometimes the greatest battles aren't won with fists or fear, but with the strength to offer understanding to people who've forgotten how to accept it. At dawn, the dark phantoms rolled into Silver Oak Springs like a black tide. 6 bikes stormed Oak Street, baseball bats and chains in hand. But what they found wasn't a frightened little girl behind a lemonade stand. They found a wall of people. Dutch Calloway stood at the front, his hands wrapped firmly around an old wooden baseball bat. Behind him stood over a dozen townspeople, men, women, teenagers, all forming a human shield around Maddie's rebuilt stand. Ruth Whitaker sat calmly in her lawn chair, dialing her phone. Morning, boys, Dutch called, as the bike slowed. Bit early for lemonade, ain't it? Blade revved his engine. This doesn't concern you, old man. Walk away. Dutch stepped forward, voice steady. See, that's where you're wrong. This stopped being about lemonade the moment you threatened a child. Our child. At a military base, 3 states away, Commander Brighton signed the last of his emergency leave paperwork. The young clerk looked up, eyes wide at his record. Sir, you're listed as arriving tomorrow. But there's no transport until. There's always a way home, son, Sawyer said quietly, eyes fixed on the door. There was no hesitation in his voice. No doubt. Just the weight of absolute certainty. Because when it matters enough, you make a way. Back in Silver Oak Springs, Maddie sat in the quiet corner of the hospital's research library, scrolling through decades of newspaper archives. A headline stopped her cold. Local woman dies after insurance denial, brother vows justice. The photo beneath it showed a younger Hawthorne, clean-shaven and sharp-eyed, holding his sister's hand in the same hospital room where Tommy now fought his daily battle with leukemia. "I thought I'd find you here," Dr. Chase said softly, taking the seat beside her. "You're trying to understand him, aren't you?" Maddie nodded. "Dad says every enemy is just a friend who lost their way." Her fingers gently brushed the screen. "He lost his sister, right here. In this place." "There's more to that story," Dr. Chase said, pulling out a thick file marked Sarah Thorne. "The treatment Hawk fought for, it wouldn't have saved her. It would have only caused her more pain. What he saw as a betrayal was actually a blessing in disguise. The insurance company's denial was the only mercy she had left." "Does he know that?" Maddie asked. "We tried to tell him," Dr. Chase said quietly. "But grief doesn't always leave room for truth." Outside Dutch Calloway's hardware store, the sound of chains rattling announced trouble. The dark phantoms circled like wolves. Inside, customers crouched low behind shelves, eyes wide with fear, while Dutch calmly loaded a round into his shotgun. "Last chance, Calloway." Hammer's voice boomed through the door. "Open up and pay what you owe, or we start breaking things." Dutch stepped into the light, chambering around with deliberate force. "The only thing I owe," he growled, "is respect to this town. Something you boys seem to have forgotten." The first window shattered inward. But before the destruction could continue, sirens screamed in the distance. The bikers scattered like shadows, but not before Dutch locked eyes with Hammer. And what he saw wasn't rage. It was shame. Back at the Phantom's clubhouse, tension snapped. "We're supposed to be outlaws, not thugs," a younger member shouted. "There's no honor in this." "Honor?" Hawk barked out a laugh, bitter and dry. "Honor didn't save my sister. Honor didn't make anyone care when she needed help. The only thing people understand now is fear." But then Blade spoke, quiet, firm. "Maybe that's what you understand. But some of us remember when wearing this patch meant something. When it stood for brotherhood, not bullying kids." That afternoon, Maddie returned to her stand. She poured lemonade under the watchful eyes of her protectors. Each glass sold, every dollar raised, it all felt like a small victory. A quiet message that said, "We're still here." "Your father would be proud," Ruth Whitaker said gently, watching her count the day's earnings. Maddie nodded, her voice steady. "He'll be home soon." 3 more months, Ruth repeated with a smile, though she already knew the truth. Sometimes, fathers show up exactly when they're needed most. The confrontation outside Dutch's store spread like wildfire. It struck a nerve. People across town remembered who they were before fear took root. They remembered what community really meant. Officer Cross found Dr. Chase waiting in his office, Sarah Thorne's full medical file in her hands. "They need the truth," she said. "All of it. Before this spirals beyond what any of us can control." "Truth doesn't always stop violence," Liam warned. "No," she replied. "But it can change why people fight. And maybe give them a chance to choose something better." As dusk fell, the air in Silver Oak Springs grew heavier. Everyone felt it. A reckoning was coming. Back in the hospital, Tommy sat up in bed and pointed toward the window. "Look," he shouted. "Real soldiers." A military convoy rolled silently through town, heading for the nearby base. But leading the formation was something different. Someone different. Commander Sawyer Brighton sat in the front vehicle, eyes scanning every intersection, every alley, every potential threat. But he wasn't planning a battle. He was planning a way back. Because after years in special operations, he knew the most decisive victories aren't always won with force. They're won with understanding. The Phantoms thought this was a fight for territory, for dominance, for revenge. They had no idea what real warriors fight for. Back at the clubhouse, Hawk stood once more in front of the photo wall. Sarah's face smiled back at him from a frozen moment in time. Tomorrow, he whispered. Tomorrow they'll understand what it means to lose everything. But what Hawk didn't see was that his grip on the gang was already slipping. 3 members had quietly removed their patches. Others stood watching, uncertain, waiting for someone to lead them in a different direction. And then, in the quiet of Dutch's hardware store, the bell above the door chimed. A single figure stepped inside, his boots dusty from travel, his uniform still creased from deployment. Commander Sawyer Brighton. Dutch looked up, eyes wide. Welcome home, Sawyer. I wish it were under better circumstances, the soldier replied. Sometimes, Sawyer said, his voice low but steady, circumstances are exactly what they need to be. Tell me everything. Outside, Silver Oak Springs settled into a tense, uneasy night. Tomorrow would bring either restoration or reckoning. But in this narrow space between fear and courage, between vengeance and redemption, there was still time. Time for truth. Time for change. Time for choices that rewrite everything. The morning mist crept low across the streets as Commander Sawyer Brighton quietly walked the path his daughter took every day. His soldier's mind noted everything: sidelines, exits, cover, high ground. But this wasn't about tactics. This was about love, legacy, and making sure no child, especially his, ever had to face fear alone again. What struck Commander Brighton most weren't just the repairs to the lemonade stand, it was the small things. Chalk drawings from neighborhood kids, encouraging messages on the sidewalk, and the way the new wood didn't match, but had clearly been placed with care. It was a stand that had been broken and rebuilt with pride. Just like Maddie. She's here every morning by 7, Dutch said, walking beside him. Won't let anyone stop her. Just like her mom. Brighton nodded, pride mixed with concern. How bad is it? Bad enough to call you, Dutch replied. But not too bad to fix. Meanwhile, back at the Dark Phantom's clubhouse, Blade burst through the door. Boss, Brighton's back. Hawk froze. He's not due for months. Saw him myself. Talking to Calloway. To Cross. Hawk hurled his coffee cup against the wall. Should have ended this yesterday. Hammer stepped forward. Maybe we should think this through. He's not just some cop. He's just a man, Hawk said coldly. And men bleed. At the lemonade stand, Maddie was arranging her mason jars when she heard the footsteps. Steady. Familiar. Her heart stopped. Hey, kiddo, her father said, standing there in civilian clothes but carrying the same calm strength. Daddy, she cried, running into his arms. I didn't give up. I never doubted you, he whispered. Now, tell me about these Dark Phantoms. Across town, Officer Cross watched as 3 bikers ripped the patches from their vests and rode away. That's 5 today, he told Dr. Chase. Words out, Brighton's back. In Ruth Whitaker's living room, neighbors filled every seat. She looked around. Commander Brighton can't do this alone. Are we ready to take our town back? At St. Mary's, Maddie walked in with her dad. Are you really a Navy SEAL? Tommy asked from his bed. Sure am, Brighton smiled. But today, I want to hear about you. Tommy hesitated. It's hard, being scared and having to be brave anyway. Brighton leaned in. That's what real courage is. Outside the hospital, 2 phantoms watched from their bikes. She's with her dad now, one said. We could. No, Hawk's voice cut in over the radio. Not yet. Tonight. We finished this. But inside the hospital, Dr. Chase stood on the steps, holding Sarah Thorne's file. She spoke into the radio, hoping Hawk would hear. You need to know the truth about your sister. But the bikes were already gone. Back at Dutch's store, Brighton examined a shattered window. They're sloppy. Emotional. That makes them more dangerous, but more likely to mess up. And as the town buzzed with tension, something was shifting. People walked taller. spoke freer. And Maddie? She stayed at her post. Running away won't help, she told her dad. Mom always said, face your fears in the daylight. She was the bravest person I ever knew, Brighton said softly. Until today. She squeezed his hand. They're hurting, too. Like we did. After Mom. Brighton nodded. Pain either breaks us or transforms us. The choice is always ours.